What happens when a billionaire speaks in a language he thinks no one understands, only to be silenced by the one person he never expected? Have you ever been underestimated because of your background? Have you witnessed someone use their power to intimidate others? What would you do if you had the chance to show your true worth? Tonight, you'll discover how one fearless response shattered every assumption in a room full of the world's most powerful people. But here's what nobody saw coming. Stick around because this story will change how you think about power forever. If you ever felt invisible or underestimated, smash that like button right now. In the glittering world of extreme wealth and absolute power, there are rules, unspoken hierarchies that everyone respects, lines that nobody dares to cross. Sheikh Zaid Al-Fahim knew these rules better than anyone. He'd been born into them, shaped by them, and had used them to build an empire worth billions. At 34, this wasn't just any ordinary rich man. This was royalty. This was old money mixed with new power. A man who commanded respect with a single glance, who could make or break fortunes with one phone call, who spoke multiple languages but chose Arabic when he wanted to assert his dominance. Because here's the thing about power. It's not just about what you have. It's about what you can do that others can't. It's about the moments when you remind everyone in the room exactly who they're dealing with. And that's exactly what Sheikh Zaid planned to do on this particular night. The Royal Palace in Al-Mazir was hosting the event of the year. Think about the most exclusive gathering you've ever heard of, then multiply that by 1,000. We're talking about oil tycoons, tech moguls, foreign dignitaries, and business leaders who collectively control more wealth than entire countries. Everyone who mattered was there. Everyone who thought they mattered was there. The champagne cost more per bottle than most people make in a month. The jewelry in that room could fund a small nation. This was where deals worth billions were made with handshakes, where the future of markets was decided over dinner conversation. But in the corner of this magnificent hall, moving quietly between the golden columns and crystal fixtures, was someone who didn't belong to this world at all. Layla Hassan, 26 years old, a maid. While the elite discussed their latest acquisitions and investment strategies, she refilled their glasses and cleared their plates. While they laughed about their private jets and yacht collections, she made sure their napkins were properly folded. She was invisible to them, just part of the background, like the expensive art on the walls or the fresh flowers arranged in massive vases. But here's what none of them knew. Layla wasn't just any maid. This woman had grown up in a small desert village where survival meant being smart, resourceful, and fearless. She'd learned multiple languages not in expensive schools, but out of necessity. She developed the kind of intelligence that comes from having nothing and needing everything. Most importantly, she'd learned to see through people. When you serve the wealthy, you learn their secrets. You hear their real conversations. You understand exactly who they are when they think nobody important is watching. So when Sheikh Zaid decided to make his power move that night, when he chose to speak in Arabic to assert his authority over a room full of international guests, he had no idea that someone was listening who could understand every single word. He had no idea that this someone had been watching him all evening. He had no idea that this someone was about to respond in a way that would change everything. Because sometimes, the most powerful person in the room isn't the one everyone's looking at. Sometimes, it's the one they've completely overlooked. Are you ready to see what happens when an underestimated woman decides she's had enough of being invisible? The Al-Mazir Royal Palace that night was a testament to centuries of accumulated power. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing rainbows across marble floors, so polished they reflected like mirrors. Golden Arabic calligraphy adorned walls that stretched 30 feet high, each letter carved by master craftsmen whose families had served the royal house for generations. The scent of rare oud would mix with jasmine filled the air, a fragrance that cost more per ounce than most people's monthly salary. But this wasn't just about displaying wealth. This was strategic. Every detail had been chosen to remind guests exactly where they stood in the global hierarchy. Sheikh Zaid Al-Fahim moved through this carefully constructed world like he owned it, because he did. His custom tailored though was woven with threads of real gold, subtle enough to appear modest, but expensive enough that anyone who knew quality could recognize its true worth. When he walked, conversations paused. When he smiled, deals were made. When he spoke, everyone listened. Yet, tonight, something was different about him. His usual confidence carried an edge of restlessness. His dark eyes, which normally held the steady calm of a man who controlled his own destiny, kept searching the crowd as if looking for something he couldn't name. The truth was, Sheikh Zaid was lonely. Not the kind of loneliness that money could fix with expensive toys or exotic vacations. This was the bone-deep isolation that comes from being surrounded by people who only saw his fortune, never the man behind it. Every conversation was a negotiation. Every smile was calculated. Every relationship was transactional. He'd lost his parents in a helicopter crash when he was 21, inheriting not just billions but the crushing weight of expectation. 13 years later, he'd tripled the family fortune and expanded their influence across 3 continents. But success had come at a price. He'd forgotten what it felt like to have a genuine human connection. Meanwhile, 30 feet away, Layla Hassan was experiencing the evening from an entirely different perspective. She'd grown up in Wadi al-Hawa, a village so small it didn't appear on most maps. Her father had been a mechanic who worked on the trucks that carried supplies to oil refineries. Her mother had cleaned houses for the few wealthy families in the nearest town. Layla had learned early that intelligence was her only way out of poverty. While other children played, she'd studied. She'd mastered Arabic, English, French, and Italian by listening to radio broadcasts and borrowing books from anyone who would lend them. She'd taught herself business principles by reading discarded newspapers from the capital city. She'd learned about wine, art, and fine dining not from expensive courses, but by watching and listening to the wealthy families her mother served. When the opportunity came to work at the royal palace, Layla had taken it not just for the money, but for the education. Every day, she observed how real power operated. She watched business leaders negotiate multi-million-dollar deals over coffee. She listened to political discussions that would reshape national policies. She learned the subtle language of influence and authority. But here's what made Layla dangerous to the established order. She understood that most of these powerful people were performing. They spoke louder when they felt insecure. They name-dropped when they felt inadequate. They used complex language when simple words would do, all to maintain the illusion of superiority. Tonight, as she moved the crowd refilling crystal glasses and replacing silver serving spoons, Layla was conducting her own form of research. She watched Sheikh Zaid's interactions with his guests, noting how a smile never reached his eyes when talking to certain business partners. She observed how he excused himself from conversations that bored him, always politely but decisively. She saw how he stood slightly apart from groups, maintaining the careful distance that power required. Most telling of all, she noticed how he kept glancing toward the servants' area, not with disdain, but with something that looked almost like curiosity, as if he was wondering what it would be like to be anyone other than who he was. The tension in the room was building for reasons the guests couldn't articulate. Oil prices were fluctuating. Political alliances were shifting. Some of the men in this room were rivals disguised as friends, smiling while calculating how to destroy each other's businesses. Others were nervous about new government regulations that could impact their profits. Sheikh Zaid felt it all. The undercurrents of competition, the masked hostility, the careful maneuvering for position. It exhausted him. He'd built his reputation on being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But tonight, he found himself wanting something completely different. He wanted honesty. He wanted someone to speak to him like he was human instead of a bank account with legs. As the evening's formal program approached, Sheikh Zaid made his way toward the raised platform where he would address his guests. His speech was prepared, a carefully crafted message in Arabic that would remind everyone of his cultural authority while discussing new business ventures. What he didn't know was that Layla had positioned herself near the platform, ostensibly to clear tables, but actually to observe his performance of power up close. What neither of them knew was that this moment would shatter every assumption in the room and change both their lives forever. Sheikh Zaid stepped onto the raised platform with the fluid confidence of a man who had commanded rooms like this for over a decade. The conversations gradually died down as guests turned their attention toward him, crystal glasses pausing midway to lips, business cards being discreetly tucked away into jacket pockets. He adjusted the diamond-encrusted microphone with practiced ease, his eyes sweeping across the sea of expectant faces. Oil executives from Texas leaned forward in their chairs. Technology moguls from Silicon Valley set down their phones. European aristocrats straightened their postures. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for, when the most powerful man in the room would reveal his next move. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sheikh Zaid began in perfect English, his voice carrying effortlessly across the vast hall. "Tonight, we gather not just as business partners, but as architects of the future." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Standard opening. Expected. Safe. But then his expression shifted. The practiced smile faded, replaced by something more intense, more calculating. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. When he spoke again, his voice dropped to a lower register and the language changed completely. He switched to Arabic, his words flowing like poetry but carrying the sharp edge of a blade. The effect was immediate and exactly what he'd intended. The English-speaking guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly excluded from the conversation. A few attempted knowing nods, pretending to understand. Others exchanged nervous glances, realizing they were now outsiders in their own exclusive gathering. Sheikh Zaid continued in his native tongue, speaking about business secrets and power dynamics that only a select few could comprehend. The Arabic-speaking guests, a handful of Middle Eastern oil ministers, and one ambassador from Morocco, nodded slowly. They understood. They were being included in an inner circle, elevated above the others through the simple act of linguistic selection. Their chests puffed slightly with pride. Meanwhile, the excluded majority grew increasingly agitated. The tech mogul from California clenched his jaw. The British petroleum executive's face reddened. The German automotive heir gripped his champagne flute, so tightly his knuckles went white. This was power at its most raw and sophisticated. Sheikh Zaid wasn't just speaking. He was demonstrating hierarchy, creating division, reminding everyone that even among the elite, there were levels they couldn't access. His Arabic grew stronger and more commanding as he revealed details about tonight's deal that would reshape regional power structures. The room was electric now. Those who understood leaned forward hungrily. Those who didn't understand leaned forward desperately. Try to catch any familiar word, any clue about what they were missing. Sheikh Zaid raised his voice for his final statement in Arabic, the one designed to remind everyone exactly who controlled this room. He declared that anyone who couldn't understand his words didn't deserve to be part of their future. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't respectful quiet. It was a stunned hush of people who had just been publicly excluded and didn't know how to respond. The power play was complete. Sheikh Zaid had just divided his own guests into worthy and unworthy categories, using nothing but language. He began to smile, satisfied with the demonstration of his cultural and linguistic superiority. That's when Layla stepped forward. She had been standing near the service entrance, holding a silver tray of empty glasses. But now she set the tray down with deliberate precision, the soft clink of crystal against marble cutting through the silence like a bell. Every eye in the room tracked her movement as she walked closer to the platform. Her modest black uniform and simple headscarf created a stark contrast against the sea of designer gowns and custom suits surrounding her. Sheikh Zaid's eyebrows drew together in confusion. Staff didn't approach the platform during speeches. This violated every protocol. Layla stopped exactly 10 feet from platform, close enough to be heard clearly, far enough to maintain respect. Her posture was straight, but not defiant, confident but not challenging. When she spoke, her voice was clear, measured, and absolutely fearless. She responded in perfect Arabic, using the formal classical pronunciation reserved for scholars and diplomats. The impact was explosive, not because she had spoken Arabic, but because she had spoken it with the sophistication of ancient poetry, of religious texts, of high intellectual discourse. This wasn't casual conversation. This was the language of masters. The Moroccan ambassador's mouth fell open. The oil ministers from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait turned to stare at her in disbelief. The European guests, still excluded from understanding the words, nevertheless recognized that something extraordinary was happening based on the body language around them. But Sheikh Zayd's reaction was the most dramatic of all. His composed expression shattered completely. His eyes widened, his grip tightened on the microphone, and for the first time in years, he looked genuinely shocked. Layla continued in flawless Arabic, her voice growing stronger as she delivered what could only be described as a philosophical masterclass. She spoke about true power coming not from excluding others, but from lifting them up. She discussed how real wisdom recognizes that the best ideas might come from the smallest voices in the room. The silence that followed was different now. This wasn't confusion or exclusion. This was pure shock. A maid had just delivered an intellectual challenge to one of the most powerful men in the world, and she'd done it in language more sophisticated than most university professors could manage. And then, in a moment that no one saw coming, she switched to flawless English. Perhaps, Sheikh Zayd, the future belongs not to those who hoard knowledge, but to those who share it. Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you're loving this power move. The room erupted, not in applause but in chaos. Guests turned to each other with wide eyes, whispering frantically. The oil ministers looked like they'd seen a ghost. The excluded international guests suddenly realized they'd witnessed something historic. A servant had just intellectually challenged a billionaire and done it brilliantly. Some of the European executives began demanding translations from their Arabic-speaking colleagues. Others pulled out their phones, frantically trying to use translation apps. The energy in the room had completely shifted from exclusive sophistication to confused excitement. Sheikh Zayd stood frozen on the platform, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. This woman, this maid, had just demolished his power play with grace, intelligence, and a wisdom that cut straight to the heart of what leadership actually meant. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, everything changed. The billionaire who thought he controlled everything had just been schooled by someone he'd never even noticed. And somehow, instead of anger, what he felt was something he hadn't experienced in years. Respect. Genuine, profound respect. The chaos in the grand hall continued to escalate as Sheikh Zayd stepped down from the platform, his mind reeling from what had just occurred. Guests were clustering in animated groups, their voices rising as they dissected the unprecedented moment they'd witnessed. Some demanded explanations, others speculated wildly about the maid's background, and a few shrewd business minds were already calculating how this disruption might affect their deals. Sheikh Zayd moved the crowd like a man in a trance, acknowledging the excited chatter with forced nods while his thoughts remained fixed on one person. Where had she gone? The woman who had just shattered his worldview with a few perfectly chosen words had vanished as quickly as she'd appeared. Meanwhile, Layla had slipped away through a service corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs. What had she done? The rational part of her mind screamed that she'd just committed career suicide, and possibly actual suicide, depending on how the Sheikh chose to respond to such public defiance. She found herself in the East Wing's marble hallway, a quieter section of the palace where ancient portraits of past rulers gazed down with stern expressions. The sounds of the party felt distant here, muffled by thick walls and heavy curtains. She pressed her back against the cool stone, trying to steady her breathing and process the magnitude of what had just happened. The soft echo of footsteps made her freeze. Sheikh Zayd appeared at the far end of the corridor, having somehow tracked her retreat. In the subdued lighting, away from the crowd's gaze, he looked different. The commanding public figure had been replaced by someone more human, more uncertain. His perfect composure had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. They stood there for a long moment, 30 feet apart, neither moving. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, charged with electricity and unspoken questions. Why? His voice carried clearly in the empty space. But it wasn't the authoritative tone from the platform. This was quieter, almost vulnerable. Layla lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. Because someone needed to. He took a step closer. Do you have any idea what you just done? I spoke the truth. Her voice remained steady despite the tremor she felt inside. Something I suspect you don't hear very often. Another step. The distance between them was closing, but the emotional chasm felt even wider. You don't understand the consequences. Don't I? Layla interrupted, pushing herself away from the wall. I understand perfectly. I understand that I'll probably lose my job. I understand that you could have me arrested, deported, or worse. I understand that I just challenged one of the most powerful men in the world in front of his most important allies. Sheikh Zaid stopped walking, struck by the fearless honesty in her words. What I don't understand, she continued, her voice growing stronger, is why you needed to humiliate half your guests to feel powerful. What I don't understand is why a man with everything would choose to use his gifts to exclude rather than include. The words hit him like physical blows. No one had spoken to him this way since. He couldn't remember when. Maybe never. You think you know me? The question came out rougher than he intended. I think I know loneliness when I see it. The softness in her response caught him off guard. I think I recognize someone who's forgotten what it feels like to be genuinely understood. The observation was so accurate it took his breath away. For 13 years, he'd been surrounded by people who wanted something from him, advisors who told him what they thought he wanted to hear, business partners who smiled while plotting against him, women who saw his wealth before they saw his face. And you think you understand me? He was close enough now to see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. I think we both know what it's like to be underestimated. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The difference is, I've learned to use it as strength. Something shifted in the space between them. The formal barriers of employer and employee, of royal and servant, began to dissolve in the face of this honest exchange. Sheikh Zaid reached out slowly, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. The simple touch sent shockwaves through both of them. You're dangerous, he murmured. So are you. But she didn't pull away. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. It started gentle, tentative, as if they were both testing the reality of this impossible moment. But the weeks of watching each other from across social chasms, the electric tension of their public confrontation, and the raw honesty of this private confession combined into something that couldn't be contained. Layla's hands found the front of his thobe, her fingers gripping the expensive fabric as if anchoring herself to something solid. Sheikh Zaid's arms encircled her waist, pulling her closer until no space remained between them. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and hunger pouring out in desperate, seeking touches. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Sheikh Zaid rested his forehead against hers, his hands trembling slightly where they framed her face. This is madness, he whispered. Complete madness, she agreed, but made no move to step away. If anyone sees us, your reputation, your standing, your business relationships. She finished the thought. Everything you built could crumble. And you, his thumb traced her jawline, you could lose everything, your job, your security, your safety. The weight of reality pressed down on them, but neither moved. They stood there in the shadowed corridor, holding each other, both fully aware that they were balanced on the edge of a cliff with no safe way down. Tell me to walk away, Layla whispered against his lips. Tell me this was a mistake. Sheikh Zaid's response was to kiss her again, deeper this time, with a passion that spoke of a man who had found something worth risking everything for. When they separated, his dark eyes held a resolution that sent shivers through her. I can't, he admitted. God help me, I can't. The next morning arrived with the swift brutality of reality crashing back into their lives. Sheikh Zaid sat in his private office, staring at the stack of urgent messages that had accumulated overnight. His personal assistant, Rashid, stood beside the mahogany desk with barely concealed anxiety written across his weathered face. Sir, we have a situation, Rashid began carefully. The guests from last night, they're talking. Zayd's jaw tightened. Talking about what exactly? About the maid. About her response to your speech. Some are calling it disrespectful. Others, Rashid hesitated. Others are saying it was the most intelligent thing they heard all evening. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the staff quarters, Layla was experiencing her own version of hell. The servants' dining hall, usually filled with quiet morning conversation, had fallen silent the moment she entered. 20 pairs of eyes tracked her movement as she walked toward the coffee station. The weight of their stares felt heavier than the palace's marble columns. Fatima, the head housekeeper who had been Layla's closest friend among the staff, approached with an expression of barely controlled anger. "What were you thinking?" Fatima hissed, keeping her voice low enough that others couldn't hear the exact words, but loud enough that everyone knew a confrontation was happening. "Do you have any idea what you've done to all of us?" Layla poured her coffee with steady hands, though her stomach churned. "I spoke my mind. You humiliated him in front of the most powerful people in the region." Fatima's whisper was sharp as broken glass. "And now they're all asking questions about the staff, about our backgrounds, about whether we can be trusted. Half the girls are terrified they'll be fired just for association." Back in the administrative wing, Sheikh Zayd's problems were multiplying by the hour. His chief business advisor, Minister Rashid, burst through the office doors without waiting for permission to enter. The elderly man's face was flushed with indignation. "Zayd, what in God's name happened last night? I've had 6 phone calls this morning from our partners demanding explanations. The German automotive deal is hanging by a thread because Heinrich felt publicly humiliated. The British Petroleum Consortium is questioning whether you can maintain proper diplomatic relations." Sheikh Zayd stood slowly, his movements controlled but his eyes flashing with warning. "Are you questioning my judgment, Minister?" "I'm questioning your sanity." Al-Rashid shot back, his diplomatic training forgotten in his panic. "You divided your own guests into categories, excluded half of them from crucial business discussions, and then allowed a servant to publicly contradict you. The optics are catastrophic." In the palace security office, Captain Hassan was reviewing footage from last night's event with growing concern. "Rewind that section," he instructed a subordinate, "the part where she approaches the platform." They watched in slow motion as Layla stepped forward, her posture confident despite her humble position. Captain Hassan had worked palace security for 15 years. He could read body language like others read newspapers. This wasn't random insubordination. "Sir," his assistant ventured, "should we investigate her background more thoroughly?" "Already on it," Hassan replied grimly. "But I'm more concerned about what happens next." Look at the Sheikh's face when she finishes speaking. On screen, Sheikh Zayd's expression showed something Captain Hassan had never seen before. Not anger, not outrage, something that looked almost like admiration. That afternoon, in the palace's grand library, Minister Al-Rashid was holding an emergency meeting with 3 other senior advisors. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly," he announced to the small group. "Our sources indicate that several guest nations are reconsidering their partnership agreements. They're questioning Sheikh Zayd's ability to maintain traditional hierarchies and diplomatic protocols." Defense Minister Al-Mahmoud leaned forward. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that our Sheikh's judgment may be compromised. When a leader allows a servant to publicly challenge him without immediate consequences, it signals weakness to our enemies and uncertainty to our allies." Finance Minister Al-Sabah cleared his throat nervously. "You're talking about dangerous territory. Sheikh Zayd's leadership has been unquestioned for over a decade, which is exactly why this incident is so damaging," Al-Rashid countered. "One moment of weakness can undo years of carefully built respect." In her small quarters that evening, Layla sat on her narrow bed, staring at the formal letter that had been delivered an hour ago. It wasn't a termination notice, as she'd expected. Instead, it was a request for a private meeting with Sheikh Zayd the following morning. Her hands trembled slightly as she reread the formal Arabic script. Around her, the other staff members were giving her a wide berth, some out of fear of guilt by association, others out of a mix of awe and terror at what she'd accomplished. Young Amira, barely 18 and new to palace service, crept closer. "Layla," she whispered, "is it true? Did you really speak back to the Sheikh?" "I spoke honestly," Layla replied quietly. "Weren't you terrified?" Layla considered the question. Terrified of the consequences? Yes, but more terrified of staying silent when truth needed to be spoken. That night, Sheikh Zaid found himself unable to sleep. He stood on his private balcony overlooking the palace gardens, the weight of 13 years of leadership heavy on his shoulders. Every decision he'd made had been calculated, strategic, designed to strengthen his position and his kingdom's influence. But last night, for the first time since his parents' death, he'd felt truly alive. The soft knock on his door interrupted his brooding. Rashid entered with another stack of urgent communications. "Sir, we've received formal complaints from the German delegation. They're demanding a public apology. The British are requesting clarification of palace protocols. And..." Rashid hesitated. "And there are rumors circulating in the international business community. Some are calling last night's events a sign of progressive leadership. Others are labeling it a loss of control." Sheikh Zaid turned to face his oldest advisor. "And what do you think, Rashid?" The older man studied his employer's face carefully. "I think, sir, that you're about to make a choice that will define not just your rule, but your life. Have you ever had to choose between love and expectations? Let me know in the comments." Sheikh Zaid nodded slowly. The battle lines were being drawn, and he stood at the center of a storm that threatened everything he built. The question was no longer whether he could protect his position. The question was whether he was willing to risk it all for something real. The choice Sheikh Zaid made would shock everyone who thought they knew him. Instead of distancing himself from the controversy, he doubled down. The private meeting with Layla took place not in his formal office, but in the palace's ancient observatory, a circular room at the top of the highest tower where his grandfather had once studied the stars. It was symbolic. This wasn't about maintaining appearances. This was about reaching for something higher. "They want me to apologize," Sheikh Zaid said without preamble as Layla entered the room. Sunlight streamed to the arched windows, casting geometric patterns across the stone floor. "Will you?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "I'm considering it." He watched her face carefully. An apology to the guests for allowing the evening's program to be disrupted by unauthorized commentary. Layla's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. However, Sheikh Zaid continued, stepping closer. "I'm also considering something else entirely. Something that will make last night look like a minor disagreement." Now he had her attention. What if we didn't just challenge their expectations once? What if we changed the entire system? Over the next hour, Sheikh Zaid outlined a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Instead of traditional damage control, he wanted to use the controversy as a catalyst for systematic reform. Workers' rights initiatives, educational opportunities for palace staff, cultural exchange programs that would break down the barriers between different social classes. "You're talking about revolution," Layla said quietly. "I'm talking about evolution," he corrected. "The kind that happens when people see a different way as possible." But their planning sessions had to remain secret. They met in different locations throughout the palace. The old library during staff meal times, the rooftop garden after midnight, empty conference rooms during shift changes. Each meeting was brief, carefully timed, and focused on concrete actions rather than romantic sentiments. Within 2 weeks, the first changes began appearing. Sheikh Zaid announced a new policy. All palace staff would receive educational stipends to pursue advanced learning, not just job training, but university-level courses in any field they chose. The announcement sent shockwaves through both the palace hierarchy and the broader community. Minister al-Rashid demanded an immediate explanation. It's economically unsound, he argued during a heated cabinet meeting. Why invest in educating servants who might leave for better opportunities? Because educated people make better decisions, Sheikh Zayed replied calmly, and better decisions benefit everyone. But the real controversy came with his second announcement. Monthly forums where palace staff could present policy suggestions directly to the Leadership Council. No intermediaries, no filters, just honest feedback from the people who actually witnessed how royal decisions affected daily life. The first forum was scheduled for the following Friday. Meanwhile, word of these changes was spreading beyond the palace walls. In coffee shops throughout the capital, people discussed a mysterious maid who had spoken truth to power. In university dormitories, students debated whether the Sheikh's reforms were genuine or just political theater. Most significantly, in the working-class neighborhoods where Layla had grown up, her story became something else entirely. Proof that change was possible. Amira, the young palace servant, approached Layla one evening with wide eyes and a folded paper in her hand. "What's this?" Layla asked. "A letter from my cousin. She works in the textile district." Amira's voice was hushed with excitement. "She says the workers are organizing. They want a petition for better conditions, and they're using your speech as inspiration. They're calling it the Layla Protocol. Speaking truth without fear." The ripple effects were spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, but so was the opposition. Defense Minister al-Mahmoud had been making his own quiet contacts, phone calls to regional allies, discussions with business partners who felt threatened by the Sheikh's sudden progressive streak, careful suggestions that perhaps Al-Mazir needed more traditional leadership. The breaking point came when Sheikh Zayed received an ultimatum disguised as a formal request. "The Regional Council of Ministers would like to discuss your recent policy changes," al-Rashid announced during what should have been a routine briefing. "They've expressed concerns about stability and consistency in regional leadership." Sheikh Zayed set down the document without reading it. When? Tomorrow. They're already en route. The message was clear: justify your actions or face removal. That evening, Sheikh Zayed found Layla in the garden where they'd first planned their reforms. "They're coming," he said simply. "I know." She'd heard the rumors from other staff. "What will you do?" "What we planned from the beginning." His voice carried a certainty that surprised them both. Show them that leadership isn't about maintaining power. It's about deserving it. The next 24 hours would determine not just their future together, but the future of everyone who had dared to hope that change was possible. The final confrontation was about to begin. The confrontation that everyone expected never happened. When the Regional Council of Ministers arrived at the palace, they found something that stopped them cold. A line of over 300 palace staff, local workers, and community members standing quietly outside the main gates. Not protesting, not demanding, simply present. They were there to witness history. Inside the Great Hall, Sheikh Zayed faced his critics with Layla standing beside him. Not behind him, not hidden away, but as an equal partner in the transformation they'd initiated together. "You question my leadership," Sheikh Zayed began, addressing the assembled ministers and business leaders. "You suggest that progress equals weakness. But I ask you to consider this. What kind of leader am I if the people I govern cannot speak freely in my presence?" Defense Minister al-Mahmoud stood abruptly. "This is exactly the kind of—" "Let me finish." Sheikh Zayed's voice carried absolute authority. 3 weeks ago, this woman challenged my perspective. Instead of punishing her for it, I listened. The result? Worker productivity has increased by 40%. Palace efficiency has improved dramatically. Most importantly, we've discovered innovations and solutions that my advisors and I would never have considered. He gestured toward Layla. She didn't just speak Arabic that night. She spoke truth, and truth, regardless of its source, deserves our attention. Minister al-Rashid tried one last desperate argument. Tradition demands. Tradition? Layla interrupted, her voice clear and confident. "It is not a chain to bind us to the past. It's a foundation to build a better future." The room fell silent. What happened next shocked everyone present. One by one, the international business leaders who had initially felt excluded began standing. The German automotive heir was first, followed by the British petroleum executive, then others. "Your Highness," the German delegate said formally, "we came here concerned about diplomatic protocol, but what we've witnessed is leadership evolution. Our companies want to partner with innovators, not traditionalists." Within 6 months, Al-Mazir became a model for progressive Middle Eastern governance. The educational initiatives sparked a technological revolution. The worker forums generated policy innovations that other nations began adopting. Most remarkably, economic growth accelerated rather than declined. Sheikh Zayed and Layla married in a ceremony that was both intimate and historic, attended by former opponents who had become allies and workers who had become community leaders. But their true legacy wasn't a love story, remarkable as it was. Their legacy was proof that courage is contagious. When one person stands up and speaks truth, it gives others permission to do the same. When leaders listen to voices they've never heard before, they discover solutions they never knew existed. Today, the Layla Protocol has spread far beyond Al-Mazir. In boardrooms and classrooms, in government offices and community centers, people remember that the most powerful person in any room might be the one everyone's overlooking. The billionaire who spoke in Arabic learned that real power comes not from excluding others, but from including them. The maid who replied taught the world that wisdom doesn't require wealth, position, or permission. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the largest truth. If this story moved you, subscribe for more incredible tales that will blow your mind. And share this with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters.